Dagda Focus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. It's John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and I'm here with another video in our YouTube series. Just to let you know, we've hit the mid-March in 2022, and Laura and I set ourselves a 90-day challenge to turn up every single day in YouTube. So we are coming to the end of that. We have about 2 weeks left because we're going to finish at the end of March. But fear not, there's still going to be some content here weekly. So there'll be one video from myself and one video from Laura every week, as well as an additional video over in the Irish Pagan School Patreon. So it is just something to provide more content there to community, because that's really what we're about. We are content creators, but it's also about connecting to that community wherever we can. So I have mentioned a number of different times in the many videos that I've talked about that I'm a Dagda guy. And I have done a video on how I met the Dagda and really what Dagda work looks like for me and my ongoing relationship and building that relationship with the good God of Irish Druidry. But there's one other thing I keep saying I'll get back to. Oh, I should do a video on that. Oh, I should do a video on that. And if you've watched the other videos, you may have cottoned it, and it is the names of the Dagda. And so that's what I'm going to do today. So if you're interested in knowing more about the names of the Dagda, do stick around for that. If not, okay, it's all good. So thank you very much again, all of you being here, connecting with us, and the comments, and it's really, really great. I really, really appreciate it. I always find that part's tricky. Is like, I need to remind people that if they want to keep up with this, they need to do the subscribe thing. But I tend to be a little bit passive about that. I was like, yeah, they'll subscribe if they want to subscribe. And then Laura's like, no, you need to remind them, because we are trying to drive as much information out as we can. Our motto in the Irish Pagan School is to provide, authentic connection to Ireland through getting real information out there. So the Dagda's names. Yeah, he has a lot of them. And it is very interesting how we come about those names, because there's an entire story where we get a really big insight into the Dagda's names from the Dagda himself. So if you have been following some of the information I've said, like the Dagda is his name. It's the name that is upon him, but it's also a recognition almost of what and who he is to the Tuatha Dé Danann, to the tribe. So a big chunk of this comes from the Cath Moytura, the Battle of Moytura, and there's two of them. So the core kind of stories, the core kind of sagas that make up the Tuatha Dé Danann section of the mythological cycle is the first and second battles of Moytura. And of course, all of the rave scale, as in the pre-stories, that kind of make up the structural narrative that defines how those sagas come to fruition. So it is during the second battle of Moytura where Nuada is kind of calling together some of the most skilled and most kind of powerful Tuatha Dé Danann deities, trying to get things sorted for this pending invasion by the Fomorians. And he calls together the sorcerers, the druids, the cupbearers, and the sorcerers, druids, cupbearers. There's a fourth group. Oh no, it's Gwivnu and Indech and himself and Oma. So they're all kind of there, and as they're kind of going through this process, all of them are making their offerings, making their promises of what they will commit to the battle and what they will offer to make sure that their people survive the invasion and kind of come out on top. And during that, the Dagda says, listen, the powers you all have promised, I will take upon myself. And it's pretty much saying, listen, you've all promised all of these raining fire from the sky, toppling all the mountains against their enemies. The cupbearers, with their connection to water, is like, I'll call upon the names of all of the lakes and rivers of Ireland and hide them from the Fomorians. Sorcerers, druids, cupbearers, and the other deities. Is there a fourth group? Anyway, it escapes me. That is the difficulty sometimes with Bard Brain. I remember a lot, but then some facets of it kind of get lost, and it bothers me. It does bother me. I'll find it after the video, and I'll be like, ah. Anyway, so that's where we get the Dagda. That's where it's come upon him. Nuada turns around and says, okay, well, you are the Dagda, which kind of means the good God, or the good hand, or capable God. And it's not morally good. It's because he promises all of these various feats that are core to a variety of different practices and a variety of different like skill sets and magical abilities. Again, separate druids, cupbearers, etc. He promises to do it, and everyone's like, "Yeah, the Dagda said it's done. It's pretty much as good as done." And that's where the name Dagda was put upon him, and it said that it stuck to him thereafter. Now, it does conflict a little bit, because when we know the Tuatha Dé Danann came into Ireland, it says that they come out of these 4 great cities on the islands north and east, and each of the cities brings forth a treasure, and one of the treasures is this cauldron, which from which no company would go unsatisfied. So any company, any gathering of people, who, no matter who and how many, would come to this cauldron, would always go away satisfied. And that cauldron is called the Cauldron of the Dagda. So whether or not it is the stories kind of being connected to him after the fact, or whether or not there is this awareness of the Dagda, and then he becomes the Dagda by his offering of the feast, by his offering of that promise, is something I have speculated on quite a bit within my own mind, and now I'm speculating on it with you. So if you are, exploring this, it's worth considering, because he has other names. His name is actually Uchid. So there are many Uchids in all of the lore. In fact, the Firbolg king in the first Battle of Moytura is also called Uchid, and this is spelled Eochaid. Much like you get the Irish spellings of the name Owen, is Eoghin, or sometimes An. And so it's that Eogh makes the sound, which is fantastic. So he is Uchid, which translates in a way as kind of horse lord, or okay. There is all of this stuff about the Dagda being a prodigious stallion of a man, and this whole kind of vast like representation of penis iconography that does get slapped on like deities, especially male presenting deities. And yeah, okay, symbols of fertility, yeah, okay, but the Dagda of all the deities I've come across is very different in the approach to that, which I'll actually mention a little bit later on when I talk about the story from where we find his other names. And so his name is Uchid, and he is known as Olahar, which is great or ample father. Now, diving further along, we have the Dagda we know is one of the deities that comes into Ireland. He is the one who is there in the first Battle of Moytura against the Firbolg, when the Tuatha Dé Danann, take the ascendancy and take the rulership of Ireland. It's him who kind of stands over Nuada when he gets his arm chopped off and holds back the Firbolg so that they can't fully finish the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, who was Nuada at the time. He's right the way. He is all the way there from the very beginnings, right the way through to the very end of the Tuatha Dé Danann cycle, and even after that, because it's his grandkids who kind of face off against the Milesians. And in fact, Amergin of the Milesians has to go make friends with the Dagda in order to kind of balance out. But I'm getting way ahead of myself and skipping over my team. That's a different story for a different day. But where we find the names are fascinating, because there was so much in my brain about this story, and I'm very moved by it, and I'm wondering how to present it properly without turning it into an entire fucking class and keeping you all here for hours. I joke about it in our Live at 5 community that, like, the community gathering space are not there for John to just talk for an hour, even though John can. And I'm aware of the fact that all of my videos go 20-30 minutes. But back on point. Yeah, so we have the second Battle of Moytura. This is the second kind of big saga, and this is where Bress, the failed king of the Fomorians, a failed king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, sorry, who is half Fomorian, half Tuatha Dé Danann, like overrules. He kind of lives in imbalance, and he oppresses his tribe. He oppresses the Tuatha Dé Danann in favor of his Fomorian heritage, and when he loses power, he then goes to the Fomorians and gathers an invasion force. And so we have the pending invasion of the Fomorians, and of course Dagda's involved. He's like right the way there. He is still this goodly god turning up and doing the work in order to make sure that his tribe will manage and will carry on. And so it's in this sections of the story that we find the naming. And unfortunately, it's a very tragic part of the second Battle of Moytura. And it took me a while to kind of explore that myself and to to work my way through the perspective of why would this exceedingly powerful deity, why would this guy who can, call the actual name of every mountain in Ireland, call the actual name of every river and lake in Ireland, and rain fire from the sky, why would he let what happens to him happen to him in this section of the story? And it's not good. So I'm going to give a content warning here. So content warning mentioned, I suppose, for non-consensual circumstances, non-consensual interactions with physicality, in that the Dagda is not fully consenting to what is actually done to him, but he endures it. And this is kind of where we find more about him from his own myth. And the section of the story, essentially, after the gathering of the warriors and the chieftains and all of these people promising what they're going to give to the war effort, the Dagda needs to know more. He has to have more information. And so he goes and he meets with the person who's referred to as the woman in the text, which is so totally Arthur Conan Doyle, like, Sherlock Holmesy, and like the woman, Irene Adler. I think it's funny and fascinating, but it is clarified later on in the story that the woman is the Morgan. And he goes and he meets with her and he couples with her in the ford of the River Unshin. And she kind of gives him insight into, like, what's coming down the line. Because, hey, she's a goddess of fucking prophecy and battle as much as poetry. And so he then knows where the Fomorians are going to land. And so he goes to them. Now, at this point, it's not in open conflict. We're not at the point where it's blades out everywhere. Like, the invading force has arrived. There's still room for negotiation. There's still room for some other resolution to this. And it's almost in that capacity that the Dagda goes. Now, from one point of view, he's going to spy upon them to kind of find out about their numbers, to find out information about them. But it's also what he engages in is a ritual practice of hospitality, about, neutrality, about friendship, about finding this kind of middle ground where discussion can actually happen. And what happens here, like, is that he goes to the Fomorian camp and he goes in amongst the Fomorians on his own. And he is welcomed under the rules of hospitality. Like, they're not in open conflict. He's not in violation of anything. He is free to move around. And he goes to them to kind of talk about peace, to try and talk about, like, not going to blades, not letting it go to war. But of course, Indech, who is the king of the Fomorians, who's leading this invasion, him and Balor, Indech wants war. He wants it to be a fight. And we can kind of see that in how he treats and interacts with the Dagda. So as part of the meetings and the discussions, there is this offering of hospitality. And one of the core things of hospitality is that if someone comes to your premises, they're entitled to, a meal. They're entitled to food and drink and safety and security while they're with you under your rule of hospitality. And so essentially that's what the Fomorians provide, but they twist it in such a way that they're trying to force the Dagda's hand. They're trying to force him to justify their conflict or justify their invasion, from my perspective. Okay, I'm going to be clear on this because I have gone over this part a lot and I've written a version of it myself, which is in my website, dagdabard.com. But essentially, the offering of this feast is they make the Dagda a porridge, because that's one of his favorite meals. It's one of his favorite kind of foodstuffs. Which, again, sidebar, Dagda not being heavy on carbs, all in for that slow release oats, kind of, keeping you going throughout the day. I don't know. But porridge, that association with porridge and Dagda is a very powerful image. And so they make for him a porridge. They make for him a porridge in the king's cauldron in their camp. And it says that it's 5 fists full of oats and milk, but they also put in goats and carcasses and offal and everything else. And so it's not, a pleasant kind of oatmeal. They have actually dumped a whole load of other stuff in it. And when it's boiled and prepared, they don't serve them the cauldron, they don't serve them the bowl. They dig out a big trench in the ground and they tip it into the dirt. And so, technically, they are offering a meal. Technically, they are, like, providing him with, food that, he is then obligated to kind of connect with and to share in. And if he kind of calls them out for bad hospitality, if he kind of slates them in that moment, he justifies their invasion. He justifies, their conflict with him, and by him with the Tua, with the tribe. And so the Dagda sits down on the ground, takes out a spoon, and he eats the porridge. And he eats it out of this trough in the ground, in this ditch. And it says that he kind of gets his finger in amongst the gravel at the very bottom of it to consume all of it. And from one perspective of it, like, and this is where we get this mixed impression of the Dagda, because he's gone in disguise. He's gone in a lowly garb. He's dressed as, his clothes aren't exactly fitting him. He has, like, horsehair boots with, like, the hair on the outside. He's dressed almost in peasantry, and despite the fact that he's a big ass, well recognized noble amongst the Tuatha, who later serves as king himself for 80 years in Ireland. But he goes in this guise of, peasantry and kind of like, the layman, the everyman. And it's presented that he consumes all of this from gluttony. And this might be the Christian bias that's brought into it, but he's then said to, like, just consume all of this, and his belly gets distended, so it hangs over his kind of gut, hangs down over his legs. And it's presented in this way of almost buffoonery, or almost kind of caricature or gluttonous excess that is being attributed to him. But when you look at the impact, when you look at the why, again, going past the what you're being told and looking at the cultural influences there, he's sacrificing his body and his physical well-being of form in order to prevent the conflict coming off the back of his own deeds. And so he consumes all of this porridge and everything else in there, and, like, again, gets into the gravel of it and all the rest of it, and consumes it all, so that Indech has no reason. Dagda hasn't given insult by leaving food behind, or by, decrying them over the quality of the food. And so he just full on eats it all. And so Indech is like, it's almost like checkmate. He can't do anything. There's no insult there. And so the Dagda, it describes it, he literally has to roll over on his side in order to push himself upright, because his gut is so distended, and because he has, in some way shifted his form to be able to hold to the capacity of what's been given to him. And he thanks them for the meal. He says it was great. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much. And off he goes. And this is where we get the second trial of the Dagda in this way. And that's how I personally view it. It's these kind of 3 tests that the Dagda kind of goes through, any of which at any moment could justify Indech's invasion and give him reason for war. And so the next one involves a very tragic character to my mindset, who isn't even given her own name. She is known as the daughter of Indech, and that is all. She is referenced as the daughter of Indech. And so Dagda, in this distended state, staggers himself out of the camp, and he's heading down the road. He's kind of like, waddling away as best he can. And that's when he comes across this woman standing beside the road, the daughter of Indech. And she is said to berate upon him for his attire, for how he looks, for, like, how dare he come before her? Like, does he not know she is the daughter of Indech? And she's like, you have to carry me. I demand that you carry me on your back. And again, from one perspective, it's just like, yeah, okay, I'll give someone a jockey back. If you're friends, sure, that's no problem. But he is a chieftain, a noble, a lord of his tribe, and he is being put upon by her to demean himself, or to kind of take the hit, not to his physicality or form, but to his pride. Because if he turns around to refuse her, if he turns around to insult her or anything like that at all, she can just go straight back to Dad and go, yep, justified your war. He was insulting, he was impolite, he and anything, any harm that could come to her at all would give Indech 100% justification for what he wanted to do. And so the Dagda is like, listen, I'm in no fit state here. Like, surely you can find someone else. She goes, no, it has to be you. And that's kind of when my read of the story is, he knows it's a trap. He knows that he's being set up, he's being played. And so he says, he asks her if she could, help him out, if she could lay her gentle hands upon his stomach to help him pass what's in him, so then he can carry her. And she literally kicks the shit out of him. While he's lying by the side of the road, she berates upon him. She physically lays into him until he voids his bells. And it is a horrific sight. It's a horrific kind of description. But it's not, again, he's the victim of an assault. Now, again, this is the guy who can fucking rain fire from the sky, who can call mountains by their given names. And he just takes the kicking from her. So again, remember, as we're talking through the story, why? Stick with the why. And so she physically and literally kicks the shit out of him. And all of this, he knows, is in the intent, because she's not working, and the fact that she doesn't even get her own name recorded, she's recorded as the daughter of Indech, it's not her will that's driving this from my perspective. It's Indech's will. That's why, she's just named as his daughter. It's his will that's pushing all of this forward. And so she kicks the shit out of him, literally, and then she demands, again, you have to carry me. And he's like, I can't carry you because there's a gesh upon me. And a gesh is, it's like a spiritual taboo. It's an obligation. It's an onus upon. There's a whole kind of talk on gesh. That's a whole other video we could probably do. Or I think Lora has done some content on that. And again, we don't talk about gesh lightly, gesh or gesha, because they are significantly important. So anyway, he says that he can't carry anyone on his back unless they know his name. And she's like, well, tell me your name. And he's like, yeah, well, it's Ferben. And she's like, great, okay, carry me. And he's like, well, that's not my full name. And she's like, okay, well, tell me your full name. And he's like, well, it's Ferben Bruch. And she's like, okay, well, Ferben Bruch, by your name, carry me on your back. And he's like, well, that's not my full name. And it's at this point, she has asked him that 3 times. So at this, he is then compelled to give the full answer of his name. And this is where we get this, by his own words, by his own kind of, and again, remember, names are crucially important. If I've talked about being a bard before, I've talked about this definition by recitation. Like, if you can name things and describe things, you're not actually just pointing at something that anyone else can perceive. You're actually informing in their mindset what it is you need them or what it is you want them to understand by it. And one of the more powerful formats of this structure, of this poetic structure, is known as Rosk poetry. And so many cases, like, magic spells or notifications, this definition by recitation falls into this type of poetry, this Rosk poetry, and that's ROSC. And so what the Dagda performs here is a Rosk poem, but it's a Rosk poem not about something else. It's a Rosk poem about himself. And so he says his name is Fer Ben Bruch Brogol Brumaja Kerbid Cac Rollag Bullock Lower Kirk de Brig Olaher Boff Athgan Mbaffi Brigcheer Tree Carboy Roth Rimri Rieg Scottby Obthi Olafby. Now, that is my pronunciation of it. My partner Lora has done a pronunciation video, which I will link down the bottom. And okay, and I'm jumping too many steps here. That is his name. That is what he gives his name. But that is not like Jonathan O'Sullivan. That is something more than that, because when we look into the translations of these words and how they translate when put beside each other, it becomes this whole descriptive tapestry. Like the word fair is man, but fair Ben is like peaks. And so you take Fer and Ben, you have man of the peaks. Or is it the peaked man? Or is it the horned man? Or is it, you then change the structure of the words by how you put them together. And the best translation I personally go by exists in this book, which I am holding up. So I'm holding up a book. It is called Harp Club and Cauldron, A Harvest of Knowledge. It's from Ilnada Press, which is myself and Lora, and it was edited and compiled by Laura O'Brien and Morpheus Ravenna and myself in the background. So Isolde Bullochon Carmagee of Story Archaeology, who is an expert in kind of old translations and old Irish translations, has an entire section at the start of this book where she goes in, and again, I'm holding an open page of it. There's a full kind of breakdown of all of the words as best she could translate them in. So I know Morgan Daimler has also done work on that as well. And it is like those two are the two people I would go to for my translations on things. So he gives this naming anyway. And so he gives the naming of himself. And by that point, him, again, knowing he's trapped, knowing he's put upon, he's still in this danger zone, and that if anything happens to her while she's near him, it justifies the invasion. And so she has kind of caught him out with this definition by recitation of himself. If you want to know the further translations, the book is great. Laura's pronunciation video does a translation version of it as well. But at this point, he takes off the only clothes he's wearing and uses it to clean himself as best he can. And if you remember, he lost everything that he forcibly put inside of him. And so he wipes himself down, cleans himself off, and then she climbs upon his back. And she doesn't just climb upon his back. So it says then that in one version, there's two versions of this tale. In one version, he picks up these 3 stones and puts them in his pocket. And as they're going, those stones fall out of his pocket. And that's, in essence, his testicles falling away from him as he is, in some ways, emasculated by what's happening to him. But she then rides upon his back and she flogs him. She whips him. She whips him on his rump while he's carrying her. Again, doing anything she can to force him into a position where he does some disrespect, some harm, something that she can claim injustice on to then justify her father's war. But he doesn't. It comes further along in the story, and we get to the point where, and this, I don't know if it's a presented narrative, or we come across it in stories many times, that there is almost this inversion of what is right, and then another scene later on in like second act or third act where something that was right is then inverted to be wrong, or something that was wrong is then inverted to be right. And we see, from the Morrigan and the Dagda having their consensual coupling at the ford, in this we have it being subverted or twisted to be another coupling at a ford, but this one is not right. And so she has him carry her pretty much across Ireland, and anyone seeing would be seeing this chieftain, this god of druidry amongst the Tuatha Danann, naked, filthy, being flogged, carrying a woman on his back. And he does it. He endures it. He carries her. Then they reach this ford, and she demands sex from him. And so he is then forced into this circumstance again, because culturally, there's a different narrative around sex. That is a whole other talk. But it's this thing where, once again, he's put in this position where if he were to do her any injustice, any kind of harm at all, anything she can go away with to prove or to justify her dad's invasion is kind of, and I feel pity for her, the daughter of Indech. She's not even fucking named in this story, because it's the will of her father that is defining almost everything that she does. And so we get to this point, and there's a sexual interaction between them. But it's during that things begin to shift and things begin to change. And at the last part of this narrative, or this section of the narrative, she has experienced something she never thought to experience, which is no harm whatsoever from a male. No matter how she bet upon him, no matter how she insulted him, upbraided him, harassed him, demanded sexual interaction with him, he did nothing to give her harm or to give her insult in any way, shape, or form. So it comes to this shift in allegiance, not for him, but for her. And she realizes that, and she says in this narrative, in this story, she kind of pleads with him not to go. Like, don't come to the fight. Please don't go to the fight. And he's like, I gotta go to the fight. I will be going to the fight. And she then says that, like, okay, well, I'll stop you going to the fight. I'll be the stone in every ford that will prevent you from going and crossing to the fight. And he's like, well, I will step upon every stone, and every stone will have the mark of my heel thereafter. And then she says, okay, well, I will become the tree. I'll become the grand oak in every fort, and I will block every way. And he's like, well, every oak will feel the mark of my axe. And it said then that oaks have always borne the mark of the Dagda's axe afterwards. And so she's kind of trying to not threaten him. And that's where the language here is very much different. She's almost pleading with him and trying to prevent him from going to this conflict. And he's like, I need to, I have to. This is my service to my people. And by the third, again, mirroring that story, she has to ask him his name 3 times. Now she's asking him not to go 3 times, and he's saying that he will go because he needs to go. And by the third time, her allegiance has shifted and changed. She says, well, I will come against the Fomorians when it comes to that battle. And I will take upon my wand and use my wand against them. And I will take, a 9th of them myself. And so later on, when we get to the point of conflict, the daughter of Indech is actually with the Morrigan and the Namaringa and the other kind of magic wielders casting their work against the Fomorian forces. So it is, as I mentioned, there's 2 versions of the story. It's the Cath Moytura. It's most publicly, and previous to now, there were 2 main translations, one done by Elizabeth Gray and one done by Whitley Stokes. Now there is a translation done by Morgan Daimler, which I would 100% recommend that you get their work. They are amazing. But what's interesting here is that it was Elizabeth Gray who did the translation of the work that I have just shared with you and shared my opinions and perspectives on. Whitley Stokes didn't. And this is kind of interesting and also funny and also sad about the translation work, because I have a footnote here. When Whitley Stokes went through and translated this ancient Irish information and these stories, this section I've just talked about hit against her sensibilities. And what she actually wrote here is, here is omitted an account of the meeting of the Dagda and the daughter of Indech under difficulties caused by the distension of the Dagda's stomach. Much of it is obscure to me, and much of the rest is too indecent to be published in this review. The upshot is that Indech's daughter undertakes to practice her magical arts against her father's army. So whereas Elizabeth Gray went in and gave us the information we got, Whitley Stokes was like, oh no, it's too obscure to me and inappropriate, probably because it was dealing with physical harassment and topics of sexuality. So why? Why? You have this good God who is capable of so much. Later on in the narrative, we have him stopping the sun for 9 months, or so that 9 months would pass in a day. When his son Kermit is killed, he goes and he gets the power over life and death to bring his child back. But even then, what he offers in guarantee for the taking up this club of life and death is his power over the sun, the moon, the land, the sea. He pretty much lists out everything by his own admission, what he has authority over, what he has power over. And so he has this complete ability, which is recognized in the very name that is upon him, the Dagda. So why? Why would he put himself through the harm to his physical form, his personal pride, and then his right to sexual autonomy, if not to sacrifice almost everything that he is to try and prevent a conflict that would harm his people, to try and prevent harm that was being done, not just to his people, but also to the Fomorians, because he doesn't deny her help when she offers it. So the Dagda is an amazing deity. He is someone I am constantly still fascinated by, inspired by, and I will do whatever I can as part of my vocation and commitment to him to say his name and to tell his stories, so that people will gain maybe some perspective from it, maybe some insight from it, maybe some personal reassurance from it. I don't know. But the Dagda's names, I know I didn't go into the translations of it because there are better resources for those names out there. But the fact that he defines and describes himself in this form of not just poetry, but top end poetry, magical manifestation by recitation via the format of Rosk poetry, again shows his ability, shows how amazingly capable he is during the backdrop of one of the most horrific things that could be done to a person. Now, maybe I'm over empathizing. Maybe, you know, my squishiness is getting to me. My feelings are getting to me. But when we see the Dagda throughout all of the stories, he's always doing what's best for other people. At no point is he presented as domineering and aggressive. At no point is he taking advantage. Like, even when he does have his trysts, his romantic liaisons with Boan, he literally stops the sun so that she could conceive and give birth in one day, so that no harm would come to her honor. That's the language. That's the wording of it. He literally stops the sun, not to disguise their tryst, not to hide it, not to, you know, prevent him from having any recompense. It actually says he does it for her honor. So I don't know. I find the Dagda a fascinating and amazing deity. Maybe you do too. Maybe you're interested in it. Maybe you want to go and take the free Dagda class in the Irish Pagan School. Or maybe you want to ask me questions down here and I'll see if I can answer them. But when we have a world where it's dominated by aggressive male patriarchy, and it is, I'm sorry, you know, I am a feminist, but essentially I'm a feminist towards an equalist. When we have true equality all over the place, where gender is no longer something that incriminates anyone or diminishes, demeans, or, like, you know, is held against or held anywhere at all to someone's position, their right to personal autonomy, their right to sexual security, their right to financial security. There are so many things that are imbalanced in our world. And I'm an advocate of not like flipping inverse, like, you know, well, let's just put women on top everywhere. And, like, you know, I'm not preaching towards imbalance or flipping the narrative through. I'm preaching just to get us towards balance. Get the fucking equilibrium, where people are all treated respectfully, treated all the same, irrespective of the gender, irrespective of the sexual preference, irrespective of their ethnicity, irrespective of the color of the skin, irrespective of the color of their eyes, irrespective of the language they speak, or where they happen to have been born on this planet. Gosh, I'm turning into a rant now. Equilibrium, equality. That's what it's all actually about. And unfortunately, some people need to sacrifice as much as they can to drive the awareness of that. You know, sacrifice their pride, sacrifice their comfort. Hey, I'm an introvert. This doesn't come easy, but this is worth fucking doing. So there is always going to be something to learn from all of these things. And the Dagda's names is something I will still be chewing over for many years to come, hopefully, trying to get a better understanding of how it is he describes himself. Like, for example, Rullag Bullock is one of his names, and that's like the big rolling belly, you know? One of them is, like, you know, the large lapped farter is one way to translate it. Another one is Lora Cirque de Brig, is the cackling hen, from a certain perspective, certain translations, because again, all the words change depending on how you put them together. So he is this fascinating deity. I'm obviously a t-shirt wearing Dagda fan, and I will be for the rest of my life. I work for that guy and I absolutely love him and adore him. But I think it's important to know where the stories come from and what is happening in the stories when we get this information as well. So for anyone who has been harmed, the Dagda has also been harmed. For anyone who has been diminished, demeaned, disrespected, the Dagda has been diminished, demeaned, and disrespected. For anyone else who has had their will overruled, the Dagda too has had that happen to him. Whether or not that makes him a more compassionate deity, whether or not he was just always a compassionate deity, and whether he was just able to stoically endure all of that, Well, I suppose you'll only know when you get to know him. And maybe through my conversations like this, it'll give you an insight into how to know him or how to look for him. Because he's not very far away. He listens to me all the time. In fact, his coffee mug is there, and he asked us to have matching coffee mugs today. I make a coffee for him. Whenever I'm making a coffee, I make one for him and it goes on the altar. And I reached into the press and I was like, I could do the coffee. And then I got we're having coffee. And it's that we. When he uses the word we, it's like, okay, we're paying attention. And I'm taking out I then reached to take 2 mugs, and the 2 navy mugs went, and he's like, yeah, we're having matching mugs. Normally I use a bigger mug, but he's like, no, we're having matching mugs today. So when other people's deities talk to them, it's big revelatory circumstances in some cases. When my deity talks to me, it's like, how you doing today? Can we have coffee? How about matching books? You know, it'd be great if you tell people a story about it. So that is where I will draw it to a close. Thank you very much for being with me here for this. Hopefully I didn't upset anyone or hurt anyone with this. It's never my intent, but I respect that can be the impact from time to time. But maybe we all need to be made a little bit more uncomfortable in some ways so that we can be aware how things are imbalanced. So any guy out there who's a little bit uncomfortable about the fact that, hey, yeah, males are victims too. Great. Maybe talk about the problem as opposed to have a go at the solutions or have a go at the victims of the survivors. Talk about the problem. Anyway, I'm going to stop my advocacy there. I probably need to go drink more water and less coffee today. Look after yourselves. Take care of yourselves. Remember, you are a unique expression of humanity in this existence. There will never be anyone, ever, who can be the best version of you that you can be. So look after yourself. Honor yourself. And I'll see you around the next time. Slán. Goodbye.